This is part 7 of WCF video series. In this video, we'll discuss KnownType attribute in WCF. We'll be working with the same example that we started in part 6, so please watch part 6 before proceeding. Let's assume in our organization we got two types of employees, that is full-time employee and part-time employee. The properties that are common to both of these employee types are present in the base class employee. And the property specific to full-time employee, which in this case is annual salary, is present in this full-time employee class. And similarly, hourly pay and hours worked is specific to part-time employee. Alright, so here these classes are related by inheritance. If you look at the employee service that we have implemented in the previous session, look at this get employee operation contract. It's returning the base type, and the save employee is expecting base type employee class. Okay, now we actually want to create an application that can save full-time employee and get full-time employee. In a similar fashion, I should be able to save part-time employee and get part-time employee back. Okay, which means these operation contracts should be able to return the derived types, that is full-time employee and part-time employee back, and similarly this method should be able to accept those derived types. Okay, so in order for the WCF service to be able to do that, we need to associate these derived types as known types. And how do we do that? There are several ways. One of the ways is doing it programmatically in code using KnownType attribute. We can also do this declaratively in the configuration file, which we will discuss in our next video. Okay, so first let's go ahead and create these two classes, full-time employee and part-time employee. So let's flip to Visual Studio. So this is the same example that we worked with in part 6. So first let's add a class file to our employee service, and let's call this full-time employee.cs. And within this class, full-time employee has got just one property, which is annual salary, and to speed things up I have already implemented that property, so let's copy and paste it right there. Now let's go ahead and add part-time employee. So let's call this file Parttime employee.cs. Let's make this class public, and this class is going to have these two properties, hourly pay and hours worked. So let's copy those and paste them within part-time employee. Alright, now within our employee class itself, so if you look at our employee class, at the moment we already have ID, name, gender and date of birth properties. We need to introduce the type property. So basically this type property is going to tell whether the employee is full-time employee or part-time employee, and we're going to make use of an enum to do that. So first we need to create this enum. So let's go to Visual Studio, and then within the employee class itself I'm going to create that enum. So let's call this employee type, and then we want to say the first item within this enum is going to be full-time employee, and we want that value to be equal to 1, and part-time employee, and let's specify the value as 2. Alright, and one more thing, we need type property within the employee class. So this is employee class, so let's go ahead and create an employee type. So the data type is employee type enum, and let's call the property type, and let's make this an auto implemented property. Alright, so at the moment we have designed our classes, okay, and we forgot one important thing. We need to make this class inherit from employee class. In a similar fashion, part-time employee should also inherit from employee class. So let's go ahead and do that. So full-time employee is inheriting from employee, and part-time employee is also inheriting from employee class. Now we need to associate these as known types, and in order to do that, employee class is the base class. So here, you know along with the data contract attribute, we can use known type attribute, and you need to specify the known type, and to do that we are going to use this overloaded version where it expects the type, and to get the type we use type of keyword, and one of the known type is full-time employee and the other known type is part-time employee. Alright, so here we are using known type attribute, and we are doing this programmatically within code. In our next video we'll see how to do this declaratively within a configuration file. Alright, so we are done. So to specify known types, one of the ways is to use known type attribute. Now let's first modify the database table. If you look at the database table at the moment, this is the state of the table, as of part 6. So we only have ID, name, gender, and date of birth columns. Now we need an employee type, annual salary, hourly paid, and hours worked columns in this table. And to speed things up, again I have written the SQL script to add those columns. So we are altering employee table, adding employee type, annual salary, hourly pay, and hours worked, all of them of type integer. So let's press F5. Now if you select the data back, we should have those columns there. Now let's actually get rid of this data, delete the data from the table. Alright, so at the moment we have got the columns that we need. Now another thing that we need to do is we need to modify the stored procedure as well, because look at this, when we click get employee, we want to get all the columns basically from this table. At the moment this get employee is only retrieving ID, name, gender, and date of birth. So let's also include these columns in the select statement. So let's alter this. So now this stored procedure should retrieve all the columns from the database table. In a similar fashion, save employee, we are now passing the additional 4 parameters: employee type, annual salary, hourly pay, and hours worked. Now one thing to notice here is we made annual salary, hourly pay, and hours worked nullable. The default values are null. So if we don't supply a value for annual salary, then null will be stored in the database. In a similar fashion, hourly pay and hours worked. That's basically because when we save full-time employee will not have values for hourly pay and hours worked, so they need to be null, and which means we'll not be passing values for those parameters, in which case it will insert nulls into those columns. Okay, that's why we have specified nulls for those columns as the defaults. Alright, so let's alter this procedure now. Okay, so from the database side we are done. Now we need to change the behavior of the employee service as well. So let's flip to Visual Studio, and if you look at employee service at the moment, this get employee, it's calling that sp get employee, but look at this, we are only populating ID, name, gender, and date of birth. And if you look at this object type, it's actually of type employee. Okay, now based on the type of the employee that we have within the database, we need to create that type of object and return that object back. Okay, so in the database, we are not going to have just an employee object. We will either have a full-time employee object or a part-time employee object. And how do we know whether if a particular row corresponds to full-time employee or part-time employee? That depends on this employee type column. If employee type is 1, then we know it's a full-time employee. So if you recollect, within the enum we have specified the value of 1 is full-time employee, value of 2 is part-time employee. Okay, so what we need to do within our service now, in employee service, we need to first check if the database value is 1 or 2, and depending on that, we will either create a full-time employee object or a part-time employee object. Okay, and to speed things up, I have written that code as well. So this is not specific to WCF, this is just the logic that we usually write. This is related to inheritance. Now, since part-time employee and full-time employee classes are related with employee class through inheritance, these can be returned back as an inherited type. That's general inheritance concept. But for the WCF service to be able to return them, we need to specify them as known types. Okay, so now let's go to our employee service, copy this code and paste it within this block. Okay, before we go through this code, the first thing that we have to do here is we don't want to create an employee object anymore. Let's actually initialize that to null, and then look at what we are doing here. So this code is common, whatever we have written in the previous session. Now this is the code that we copied and pasted. So what are we doing here? We are retrieving the column value of employee type, and then we are typecasting it to be of type employee type enum. Okay, and if that column value is equal to full-time employee, then look at what we are doing. We are creating a full-time employee object and then retrieving ID, name, gender, date of birth, and we are specifying the type as full-time employee, and full-time employee has got annual salary property, so we are assigning that value there. Alright, if it is not full-time employee, then we know it's going to be part-time employee. So it comes to the else part, and within the else part, we are creating an instance of part-time employee object. And to part-time employee, these two properties are specific, hourly pay and hours worked, in which case we are retrieving those values from the database column and then populating these properties. And look at the type, part-time employee. And then we are finally returning that employee object back. So straightforward code there. Okay, so that is get employee. Now in a similar fashion, we need to modify save employee. Now look at this, what are we getting into this method? We are getting the base type employee object, and keep in mind we have added type property to this class, and based on that type we are going to create parameters and then send them to the database table. Okay, so basically until this point, ID, name, gender, date of birth, these are common for both of the employees, so that code is not going to change. So what is going to change here is this part. So let's copy this, again this code looks lengthy, but it's basically same piece of code copy pasted. So we have date of birth, until this point we have discussed yesterday, and this is the piece that we have copied and pasted. So if you look at this, here we are creating another SQL parameter, employee type. So that's the name of the parameter, and we get the employee type using the type property of the employee object. Okay, and then we are adding that parameter to the command object. And then look at this, this is what is important. So here we are checking the type. So this employee object is what is coming into this method as a parameter. So we are checking the type. So how are we getting the type of that object? Using getType method. Look at what it is returning. It's returning the type back. And then we are saying, okay, is this type equal to full-time employee class? If that is the case, then create a parameter for annual salary, and typecast that object to full-time employee, retrieve annual salary property value, and then set that as the value for this parameter and add that parameter to the command object. If it's not full-time employee, then we know it's going to be part-time employee, in which case we are passing the parameters for the part-time employee. So here hourly pay and then hours worked. Okay, again we are typecasting the object here to part-time employee and then getting the respective property values. Okay, so straightforward code there again. And this bit doesn't change, so we open the connection, execute the non-query, which is going to execute this stored procedure, and we have already modified the stored procedure to include all these parameters. Okay, so basically at this point we are done with the service. Okay, so now let's actually close the host that is already running and let's rerun the project. So the host has started, so the configuration and the hosting code doesn't change in any way. Now let's get to the Vistal document. So let's go to the base address, which is localhost colon 8080, and then if we get to the Vistal document now, look at this. At this URL, so let me zoom in. So at this URL we should have the schema for the employee object. Oh. So let's copy this. Look at that, we got the schema for employee object. So ID, name, gender, date of birth. Now let's take this URL. Now here, look at this, we have the schema for our complex type, which is full-time employee, and this full-time employee has got annual salary, and we have here part-time employee, which has got hourly pay and hours worked. Now let's go back to our employee service. Now look at this, this employee type is not decorated with data member attribute, and if you look at the employee object here, it doesn't have that property serialized. Okay, so we forgot to do that. So let's go ahead and include data member attribute here, and we want the order of serialization to be number 5. So let's close the host once again, let's run it, and now let's refresh this. Look at that, employee type, that is going to be present in this file now. So now let's refresh this, and look at this, we have that enums are simple types, so that's why it says simple type here. So employee type enum, and this enum has got two values. One is full-time employee, look at this, 1 is the value, and part-time employee, 2 is the value. Okay, so that's our enum, and that is our full-time employee, and that's our part-time employee. Okay, so now within the Vistal we have the XML representation of those objects. Alright, so now clients should be able to build proxy classes. Now what's going to happen if we don't, let's go to the service, if we don't decorate this employee class with KnownType attribute? Let's actually look at that. Let's comment this KnownType attributes. Let's close the host, let's run this, and now let's refresh this. Look at this, at the moment we have employee type enum, full-time employee, part-time employee, all three. Now look at that, we have that simple type employee type enum, but we don't have part-time employee and full-time employee. That's basically because we didn't specify the known types. Okay, so let's go ahead and uncomment this code. Alright, so now let's rerun our host one more time, and then let's go to the client and then update the service reference so that the proxy classes will be updated. So now, once this is updated, we should have full-time employee, part-time employee, employee type enum, everything within employee service namespace. Okay, now when we click button get employee, what should happen? We should be able to retrieve, depending on whether we have entered the full-time employee ID or part-time employee ID, we should be able to get that employee and display them. Now if you look at the moment the web form design within the client application, we only have ID, name, gender, date of birth. Now we want to design our form with all the fields basically. That is employee type, we need a drop down list, annual salary, hourly pay, and hours worked. So we need to implement that HTML. And to speed things up, I already have typed that HTML. So let's copy that and paste it on that web form. So let's flip to the source mode. So we want after date of birth. Okay, so let me go ahead and paste it there, and then let's actually flip it to the design mode. And if you look at this, it's again straightforward HTML. I'll have all this code available on my blog in case you need it. Okay, so we have employee type, drop down list, and text boxes for these three. Okay, and if you look at this drop down list at design time, I have specified three list items. Okay, the first list item says select employee type, and the value for that is -1. For full-time employee, remember the enum value is 1, so I have specified value as 1. For part-time employee it is 2. So straightforward code. And then what we need to do is we need to set auto post back to true for this drop down list, so that when the selection changes, the drop down list is automatically going to post back to the server. And then within this, what we need to do, let's say for example we want to store full-time employee into the database table. So when I select full-time employee, it should only show annual salary table row. Okay, on the other hand, if we select part-time employee, it should display hourly pay and hours worked and hide annual salary. Okay, and in order to do that, I have got some code here. So let's copy and paste this code. So within the client, so we are saying if the selected value is -1, which means we haven't selected anything, then we are hiding all three of them. Okay, all the table rows, which means this annual salary, hourly pay, hours worked, nothing will be displayed. On the other hand, if the value is 1, that means we want full-time employee details, in which case only show the annual salary table row. Don't show hourly pay and hours worked. On the other hand, if it is not full-time employee, if it is not, please select employee, which is the first option, then the selection is for part-time employee, in which case display these two and hide annual salary. And if you look at this TR and all these TRs are nothing but table rows. So within the HTML, what I have done is for those table rows, for annual salary, look at this is the table row. I have given it an ID and run it, so that we can use that ID to dynamically hide and display. And then initially, when the form first loads, we are setting the visibility of those rows to false. Okay, alright, so that's straightforward drop down list selected index changed code there. And then now the important thing is get employee. So when we click get employee, we should determine what type of employee are we getting, and then based on that, we need to display the respective labels and text boxes. And again, to speed things up, I have the code already implemented. So let me copy this code, and let's flip to Visual Studio. And here let's paste that. So if you look at this code, this is again straightforward. Look at this, get employee is going to return an employee object back. Okay, and we are checking the employee type. So is the employee type full-time employee? And look at that, employee type enum is also present, and that's present in the employee service namespace. Okay, so if it's full-time employee, then set this row, this text box value to annual salary. And look at this, we are typecasting the employee object to be of type full-time employee, and then we are retrieving annual salary property value, assigning that as the text for this text box. And then we are showing that table row, we are displaying it, and we are hiding hourly pay and hours worked table rows. Else, if it's not full-time employee, then we know it's going to be part-time employee, in which case display values within the text boxes, that is hourly pay text box and hours worked text box, and then hide annual salary row and display hourly pay and hours worked rows. Okay, straightforward code. And then we also need to set the selected value within the drop down list. So employee type, we need to typecast it to integer. Okay, because selected value is a string. So what are we doing here? We are typecasting it to an integer and converting that to a string. So it will be either 1 or 2 in a string format, and then that value will be selected in the drop down list. And then the rest is common. So name, gender, date of birth, it should happen as normal. And then finally within the label control, we are saying employee retrieved. Alright, now the next step is save employee. And again, the code is right here, straightforward .NET code. So let's copy and paste this. Okay, so here we have an employee object. Now again, we don't have to create this employee object here. We can initialize that to null, and then we are saying if employee type is, look at this, within the drop down list we are taking the selected value and we are converting that to an integer, and then we are typecasting it to enum. Okay, because selected value will return a string, whether 1 or 2 that you have selected. Okay, and then we need to convert that to an integer because the underlying type for this enum is an integer. Okay, and then we are comparing that. Okay, is it full-time employee? If that is the case, go ahead, create a new full-time employee object. For some reason this ID is small case. Okay, so we are assigning ID, name, gender, date of birth, type as full-time employee, and annual salary we are retrieving it from that text box, converting into integer and assigning it there. And then we are passing that employee object to the save employee. Look at this, in spite of it being a full-time employee, we are passing it to the save employee. Save employee expects the employee object, but we are able to pass it as the derived type, and within the message we display employee saved. On the other hand, if the employee type is part-time employee, then create a new instance of part-time employee object, and then assign name, gender, date of birth, and then look at this. We are setting type to part-time employee, hourly pay, and hours worked. We are retrieving from the respective text boxes and saving the employee and displaying that message. Now, if it is not full-time employee, if it is not part-time employee, then it is going to go to the else part, in which case it will say please select employee type, because he has selected the first option, please select employee type option. Okay, so that's it, we are done. So let's go ahead and run this and see if it works as expected. So now let's see this drop down list. Full-time employee, look at that, it only displays annual salary. Part-time employee, it only displays hourly paid and hours worked. If I select employee, nothing gets displayed. Alright, now if we click save, look at what's going to happen. It says please select employee type. Okay, now let's actually create a full-time employee. Let's say 1 Mark, male, 10/10 1982, and let's say his annual salary is 60,000. Look at that, employee saved. Now let's go to the database. Let's actually check the table. Look at that, ID, name, gender, date of birth, employee type is 1 for full-time employee, annual salary 60,000, and look at hourly paid and hours worked. It's basically null. Now let's create full-time employee. and let's say ID is 2, let's say it's Mary, female, and let's say her date of birth is 11/1981, hourly pay maybe 250, and number of hours 40, and let's click Save Employee. Look at that, it says employee saved. Let's check our database table, and we got the second record. Notice annual salary null, but we have values for hourly pay and hours worked. Now let's actually check if the get operation works as expected. Get employee, look at that, we get that employee, and number 2, we get that employee as well. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.